safety nets that can be provided. Examples of what we saw happening in other countries, for example, where, a budget had already been set out in the fiscal year, already set out, but then they ordered a special sitting and said, okay, yes, we know budget has already been set, but can we move funds so that certain things can happen? We buffer the eateries that we're talking about today. You buy a meal as an individual for $15, and the government will now support with another $15 to make sure that that eatery stays in place. And it may look like a complicated thing, but is it not something that can actually be done in Kenya today, as we see, or are we just have nothing? What is it really that we are looking at? Can things like this actually be done to support the Kenyans, over which we say governance needs to happen? If there's no Kenya to govern, if there are no people to govern, where are we going to be?
I agree with you. There are things that can be done today. And I always choose to be, I keep saying, unapologetically optimistic without being recklessly naive. One, Parliament can be called back. Parliament just did a supplementary appropriation last week of a lot of money. Parliament can be called back within a week to review the supplementary appropriation and put money on the social safety nets. Fortunately, we have a huge database of the individuals, especially in urban areas, who've been receiving safety net relief.
Yes.
So it's just to appropriate a certain amount and pass it to them. So a supplementary 3 can be done next week. What we need is the goodwill. Number two, the tax relief that had been offered. I know government revenue went down a bit, though remittances went high. Strangely enough, the remittances that came up, I think that there was almost a 17% increase from certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
We had remittances from the Middle East that we've never seen before at that level. These tax reliefs can also be passed within a day, and there are those that the president can be able to even declare. And that is why, if you look at that, the pandemic legislation, which I think also we should fast track and deal with within this 1 month, it gives the president certain authority that normally would not have to go through a long winding legislative process in the case of a pandemic, and then Parliament can later review those decisions. So, I believe, yes, there are things that can be done and must be done. And I think for major part, and that's why I wanted the county governments to be involved through this law. Many of our solutions lie within us as Kenyans, and a proper county government should have a framework through which you enable your citizens to come and be there for each other. And I'll give you an example. And even when schools come back, I think this needs to be done. Like in January, I went to some schools in Dagoretti, actually Dagoretti, North Kangwari. I was giving desks to these schools. And when I sat with these kids, normally they'd be excited. They came from 5 different schools: Kangwari Primary, there's Getina, there is Muslim. And as you play with the kids, you ask them, okay, what do you guys want from your senator? And they're so excited, super senator, and you'd expect them to say, or you want football, or you want, a school bus. But what are they saying? They want food.
Wow.
They don't have food. And so that really touched me. And I got wind of this program run by a lady called Wawira. She's from Ruiru, and she's done it now in Nairobi together with Honorable KJ. And I've got it now around 5 to 6 MPs to come onto that, where we actually provide food for our kids in school at 15 shillings. The cost is actually 25, but Kenyans of Goodwill have been subsidizing it.
Yeah.
There's no law that she has already. Of course, I'm pushing now national school lunch legislation like we have in other jurisdictions. But she didn't need a law to do it. She just stepped out of her comfort zone. And you see, once we're able to show Kenyans, look, we can actually stand for each other.
Yeah.
A proper county government will be able to tell you, okay, this is where we can channel our goodwill. So there's also what we can do. We have our neighbors, and you can tell what somebody is going through. We need to be able to, to be there for each other. And that program is going so well. We're now doing 33,000 children. Kenya done a kitchen in Dagoretti, which, feeds the kids around that area. Now, Honorable Theuri has agreed to do one in Embakasi, in Umoja. Nixon Korir is also coming on board. And I have at least 7 MPs who will make sure, if nothing, our kids will be able to get food. And even during a lockdown, we can provide a way where the kids come to school and get food, because that sometimes is the only meal that they can have. So there are many ways that we can channel the goodwill Kenyans have in a trusted manner. Not in a place where you think, okay, this will be another scandal or what scandal, but in a way that is trusted and that you can see the returns.
Indeed, the spirit of Harambe is a Kenyan thing. And people
It is.
already, you hear that somebody is in need, whether it's a funeral, whether it's a medical bill, whatever. Even if you hear that a family is actually going hungry, people rally together and they come to help. And I guess that's what even the president was relying on when he formed that Harambe committee led by Jane Karuku and other members, in saying, okay, here is a framework through which Kenyans and everybody else who'd like to contribute can come in and contribute. Now, the questions will emerge on what that Harambe committee has been doing and where the resources that they've been able to mobilize have gone.
I think everybody slept. People got comfortable. And we thought the pandemic is over. Remember, Eric, there were discussions of what we call a post-economic recovery strategy,
Yes.
post-COVID economic recovery strategy.
Yes.
That would have looked at, based on now the projected economic growth that had gone down to, I think, 0.7 or something like that,
Yep.
what needs to be done in different sectors. If you look at what we call the budget policy statement that was released and we were debating it earlier in the year,
Yep.
despite the high-sounding and fancy headline of post-economic recovery strategy, there are actually no activities
To
that show
support that.
to support it.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess and we mentioned it in our report in the Senate. I don't know whether the National Assembly did the same. That the actual specific reliefs and interventions, you can't talk about post-COVID economic recovery strategy when you've lifted the tax incentives.
Yep.
You can't do that.
Mheshimiwa,
You've not injected what we call an economic stimulus to certain parts of the society. And for instance, and I'll just use that example again. If the government took up that school feeding program as part of the economic recovery strategy, what would happen is the farmers in the localities would immediately benefit. Immediately. Because all of the warus, the maize, the rice would come from
Local community.
whatever local area it is.
Yep.
And you have the local committees that do that, as opposed to what we had before, where it's teachers who are doing business, selling, one sells firewood, another one sells what. It would be immediate, because the weak underbelly we've seen in our economy, and which is why we've been affected, Eric, and I don't want to get into much details of that, is that 60%, actually 56% of our GDP is in agriculture, yet agriculture only does less than 3% of revenue.
Yep.
That gap is because we are not doing direct adding of value. And that is what a shock like this pandemic really affects many people along the value chain.
Something I wanted to ask. Is there anything in our legislation that mandates the government to actually put aside whatever it collects from its citizens to put it simply, for a rainy day? I am aware the central bank came in with monies to sort of like cushion us, but is there something that mandates? Every once in a while you hear, when we talk about budgets, for instance, we know this percentage goes here, this percentage goes here. Is there a percentage that is set aside for a day such as the one that we are now experiencing? Well, these are days really, but such a period such as the one we're experiencing?
Unfortunately not. And that is why, at an early iteration of this law, we're talking about a fund that is almost a pandemic fund. You know, that every year, over time, some small money is kept. But unfortunately, right now, there is none. A lot of what you find in the Public Finance Management Act is aspirational. You know, that says, oh, we need to have this 6 months import cover as a country. And we got fooled, for instance, because we felt, our import cover looked good in the last year because the price of oil went down because there was no international travel. So we thought we were doing well, yet we aren't doing well. Now that the price of oil is going back to where it was, we are feeling the shocks. Yeah, and when you don't have such restrictions, when you don't have such restrictions, it becomes dangerous. If you look at India, for instance, because we're talking about how we push on the people through the SMEs, there is a limit as to what percentage of the domestic market can the national government borrow. They can do their own mix in terms of debt, but from the private sector, from our commercial banks, they cannot go beyond a certain percentage. So you leave the rest for the public, for the private sector. When you leave the rest for the private sector, then cooperative bank or whatever bank can come and look for Latif and Sons and say, Latif, during this pandemic period, we know you're not doing well. You're our client. We need you because they need you.
Yep.
And you're saying we don't have that limitation in the country?
Sorry?
You are suggesting that we do not have such a limitation in our country?
We don't. I'm not suggesting. I am telling you for a fact. We don't. there's no limit in terms of the debt mix. Yeah, so the national government is able to crowd out the private sector from the banks. There's no bank that would want to give you a loan when you can get a risk-free loan from the government. And countries that have done that, because our issue is not a debt issue, it's a deficit issue. And when you have a deficit issue, what it means is that you're doing a whole budget that may not be necessary.
Yep.
We want to do everything at a go. We're doing a 3 trillion budget, yet we're raising $1 trillion, and we're paying a debt of another $1 trillion. So at this time of a pandemic, those are the discussions we should have been having. And the Senate report was very clear on that. I'd love to share it. The Senate report on the budget policy statement was very clear on some of those things.
What happens
So,
when such reports?
Yeah.
What happens when such reports are then, a Senate committee looks at that report, budget policy statements, pokes holes, raises questions, and then it goes to the floor of the Senate. It, however, passes because the final recommendation is, okay, we're going to pass this, although we're asking question A, question B, question C. We see the same with the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly. The budget policy statement is looked at by this committee. The committee comes and raises questions here and there. It says the National Treasury should be, in fact, be selling this. But the final recommendation is, Mr. Speaker, sir, we propose that we pass this. Why should this be happening? Why can't you just say we as a committee are saying no to this?
Because you don't have enough independent thinking people in Parliament. And you might feel strongly, many might feel strongly about an issue. Alafu simu itapigwa, people get in trouble. I look forward to the day, and of course not with this government, because this government, its time is running out. Maybe the next government, where you have a government that is a minority in Parliament. Because that's when we have proper oversight. Yeah, that's when people will actually be able to go to the issues and negotiate and say no. The same way, for instance, Donald Trump used to have a tough time with a Democrat Congress, and you have to negotiate. But normally, when there's homogeneity, political homogeneity between Parliament and the executive, and you have members who don't think that you should oversight if you are part of the ruling coalition, that's when things are just done, and after 3 years, you say, oh, what mess did we get ourselves into?
Doesn't it bother you, though, even as you're thinking about this, that it is against this framework that you're talking about where, truth be told, Sakaja, that there's so many things that are being said that are not being done. And it is against this framework that Kenyans are now pinning their hopes. It's the same Kenyans where we heard the announcement last week and then Kenyans were told, let's work together to be able to solve. How do you expect that to happen? Because when we talk about government and governance, it's over people. It's over people that if they're not alive, you can't govern. Right? All these things that you're putting in place, it's for them, the sovereignty of the nation. So against this framework of non-execution, it's not a reality in terms of how business is being done, and I'm talking about government business now, is not happening. It's against this framework that Kenyans are pinning their hopes. How on earth is this supposed to work?
I think, as I've said, despite the grim picture of what things have been like, we can see there's goodwill on the part of the president, for instance. Yeah. Of course, he's been led on by many people, but there's goodwill on his part. Now, what you need is to translate that to congruence with Parliament. And I wish, and I was telling the speakers, since you went there, why don't you tell the president, look, okay, there are these reports. This is what we are seeing as the legislators and as the representatives of the people. These are how we can implement. Because the measures he's put in place are not to hurt Kenyans.
Sure.
There's no president who will do that for the intention of hurting Kenyans. The Bible says there's no father who the son asks for a piece of bread, and he's given a stone. Yeah. But without that congruence, and for a long time, and of course I'm a part of Jubilee, and for a long time I've said, never mistake oversight and being corrected by your people as dissent or as being a rebel, because there was a time at which Jubilee wanted everyone to think the same way, and to if you oppose something, then you're against the government. No. Many times the truth that comes from honest criticism and advice is what a government actually needs. Yeah, and I think we saw that in many incidences last year. So I think there is still hope. I believe that we can still come together, and the executive and Parliament can sit down and go through that budget and say, look, this is where our people are hurting. I can talk about where I represent. Nairobi is what we call shamba ya mawe. When there's no food coming in, when someone has no money, you will not eat, you will not sleep, you have to pay.
Yep.
In the rural areas, maybe, you get a place to sleep. Or, and I keep saying, maybe even your fence is in Western, the fence is also mboga. You can just plug.
It's a fence.
Your neighbor will give you goro. But but urban poverty requires for us to be able to sit down together.
Yeah.
But when it doesn't happen, when there's no agency of the executive that says, look, where are the MPs from Nairobi? Where's the senator? What are you guys going through? What do you think we can do to help each other? Then that's a system I would not support. And I think those are some of the things actually that should have been changed in BBI. The practical things of governance. So yes, this country is known for good reports. Implementation is the problem. And as our democracy evolves and the Kenyans and the citizens is more enlightened, we need to make decisions around that. How do we make sure that we have a system where the government is put in check no matter who becomes president, and where our representatives truly represent, no matter which party they are in?
Mheshimiwa, there's a question that we have debated. There's an issue we've debated at great length in the studio, and I want your input as someone who's in a position to know these things far in greater detail than we do. Is the government absolutely skinflint? Are they absolutely broke to the point where they can't
Buy a handkerchief.
forget handkerchief? They can't even buy
Chewing gum.
chewing gum. I think is yes,
Patco.
or Patco, that white sweet that normally accompanies. What is the reality here?
As many economists as you'll get will give you a different view on that. Because there are certain indicators that people would use to say whether the government is broke or not. They would look at what's the interest rate, currently. What is how is your currency performing? Exchange rate, which is not doing too bad. They will try and look at what is the inflation rate in a country. So you can look at rates and say, look, the government is not broke because the rates are not bad. For me, where I measure it is, does the ordinary Mwananchi feel there's money in circulation or money in their pocket? And let me explain it. If you compare the Kibaki government, in 2003, the budgets that were being done were small budgets, a few 100 billion in terms of the national expenditure.
Yep.
In 2013, so maybe you say 200, 300 billion, yeah? In now, this financial year, we're talking about 3 trillion. Of the two governments, which one sounds broke? Of course, the one which is spending 300 billion. But in which one are people feeling they have no money in circulation? It is this one.
Yep.
So the question of whether government is broke, for me, it has to go back to,
Are
is there
people
money
broke?
circulating? Are people broke? Because government sometimes even can, the many instruments the government has to cover its back. But are the people broke? Do people feel that they have a threshold for growth, that they can acquire, they can expand their businesses? Is there money in circulation? In that government, which had a very small budget, 92% of our expenditure was locally financed. Yeah?
Yep.
I remember Mwirari used to say very proudly, hakuna pesa ya mzungu inalipa mwalimu. Yeah? Kenya hii. And even at some point, when His Excellency the President was Minister of Finance, he used to say the same thing.
Yep.
That we are financing almost 95%, only 5% is being borrowed, and not even from the banks. And that's why I remember, even when I was in campus, there were all these ladies in blue tents asking us, begging us to open accounts. Now it's like banks want to run away from you. Even banks these days, they are very rude. It's all changed. So for me, and if you look at the amount of money we pay, and I wish we had time and I've gone through and I've shown you what we discussed in BPS, the biggest project the government has today is debt. That's the biggest government project because that's the biggest expenditure. As soon as a shilling hits the account, that's the biggest expenditure. And sometimes we'll look at the wrong ratios. Yeah? Debt to GDP ratio. And they say, don't look at that. Look at debt revenue. How much of what are you collecting is actually being used here, and how much is going out. And so I think optimistically, and I'm glad Honorable Yatani, though he has now spoken about this for long, he needs to implement it, has spoken about some of these loans need to be readjusted.
Yeah.
You can't have a commercial loan over a short period of time at a high percentage rate, yet you can get a concessional one, spread out for 30 years, go much further, and reduce the interest rates. We must do that and then step out from the private sector in terms of borrowing. So yes, the government is not doing well in terms of people feeling there's money in circulation, but in terms of now infrastructure and the work it has done now in a few years, and that has been the challenge. The economic philosophy has been, let us build on infrastructure, and I promise you the infrastructure this government has done is unmatched.
Yeah.
That one, no doubt about it. Whether it is steamer, the penetration of electricity is more than all governments combined.
Yeah.
The number of roads, the tarmac is more than any other, the STR and all of that. The balance between what you do that has impact in the long term and the medium term with what Kenyans feel now is what has been lacking.
That's where
in
the
a few
issue
years,
is.
we'll remember President Uhuru and say, wow, by the way,
Yeah, he
hey,
did
this
roads,
was
eh?
amazing. Yeah, but for now, what one on here? And that's the balance we must strike.
Thank you very much, Sakaja. Senator Johnson Sakaja is the Senator of Nairobi City County. Asante sana for joining us. Yes, we should have a conversation again about the budget and how the parliament is basically playing its oversight role.
I'd love to be here again. Thanks.
Asante sana.
Thank you so much.